There we go. So, welcome everyone to our very first uh, training session for green laser pointer use and spotter. Uh, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dennis from literally halfway across the country out in Winnipeg, to who gladly, I'll say gladly, Dennis, agreed to do this session with us. Now, one of the things we're hoping will happen at the end of this, when we're completed this, is that we can then go forward with some of us, if not all of us, conducting training at various points throughout the year, so that we can train additional users and spotters for the GLPs. I know Dennis only because of my role within the National Council, and I've heard his name around the RASC for numerous years. And Dennis, I know you can do a much better explanation as to from whence you come. So I will let you do that. So again, my thanks on behalf of the center, and welcome to RASC Halifax Center.
Thank you very much, Judy. And good evening, everyone. So Judy's already introduced me quite well. So just a little bit of background on myself and why I'm the one that's kind of going to deliver the training tonight for the green laser pointer training is a few years ago, RASC had started discussions with Transport Canada when the first interim order came out. It was quite a broad order in the sense that really literally even carrying a laser pointer became illegal. And they wanted to work with the RASC because they recognize organizations like us and then our equivalent Quebec cousins that by working with us, we would likely be able to still deliver our science of astronomy and public outreach, and at the same time be very much spokespersons to try and get the word out about the hazards if you use green lasers incorrectly. So from there, we've developed the program. We've moved from what was in an interim order, and I'll go through that tonight, and it's now been moved into the regulations. I do have a background in aviation, so that's one of the other reasons is I could actually speak the same language they spoke. Because if you've never dealt with the government, it becomes quite interesting when you're trying to understand where they're coming from and the language they use and things like that, especially in aviation. So if you're all good, I'm gonna. One other thing I'll ask is that if you can ask a question at any time. If you want something clarified, want whatever the reasoning behind it or the background, if you need more detail, please ask, because I know that as Judy mentioned, you're hoping that you'll become trainers in your own organization, in your center there. So just use that little, it's on when you go in the reactions, put your hand up. Usually it should pop up in my screen right away, and then I can stop and just answer your question. So I'm fairly comfortable with the material and how it flows. So you won't be interrupting me at all. So please do that. Does anybody have any
Let me
questions?
interrupt for 1 second, Dennis. Does everyone know where reactions is on their screen? If you just hover your mouse at the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a whole bunch of things across the bottom, and there's one there called reactions. So if you just hover your mouse across the bottom.
I don't see it. Chat, share screen, record.
More.
Yes, reactions. Yeah, okay, that's it.
Okay,
Yeah,
so that's where you would go. If you click on that, you have a whole bunch of options, including raising a hand. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the easiest way for me to know you have a question. Because once I start the presentation, everybody goes small and I can't necessarily see if your hand's waving frantically. But the other one pops up and actually alerts me. So, all right, so we're going to jump in the void here and share screen. There we go. There we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Seeing the heads nod. So again, I'm presenting this on behalf of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and welcome everyone. So the training, as I mentioned, the idea behind this is initially for certification, and again, they'll be able to use it as trainers. Judy has the slide package. If anything changes, but not likely because it's a 3-year permit from last year. So we've got 3 years where we're pretty fortunate. So the idea is to get certified as a GLP user or spotter. It's the same training for both. And once you've done the exam, we completed the exam at the end and reviewed it. will be considered trained and authorized at that point. Then the center is the one that actually controls who they give that authorization to. Again, thank you all for taking the time to do this and sharing your love of astronomy with the public. So jumping right in, so the first, where it's found, the rules and regulations, and it is a regulation, and it falls under the Canadian Aviation Regulations. So when you see CAR, C-A-R, that's what I'm talking about, the Canadian Aviation Regulations. So these are enforceable. In particular, the one that applies to us, the first one is 601.20, and it states no person shall project or cause to be projected a directed bright light source in the navigable airspace in such a manner as to create a hazard to aviation safety or cause damage to an aircraft or injury to persons on board the aircraft. So a couple of things to pull out of there. Navigable airspace technically is everything from the ground up. So it gets very broad very quickly. And again, a bright light. It doesn't say lasers. Lasers are considered the bright light, but anything that's bright enough that would impact aviation safety. So green laser pointers that are traditionally used in astronomy do meet that criteria, and that's why we have the permit, and we've got certification to use it in certain areas. Now, CAR 601.21, the ... just means there's a whole bunch of legalese in front of that. Written authorization obtained to project a bright light, which is what we have with our permit from Transport Canada. So we have written authorization from Transport Canada under certain conditions, and that's what we're going to review. Anybody have any questions at this point?
Sorry, I do, Dennis. So
Yep.
do we need a copy of that when we go out into the field?
Yes, you do, and I will cover off on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll show you tonight. We'll bounce back and forth to different places, and I'll show you where you can find that. Okay? It is posted on the RASC site. So as I mentioned, we've applied and received written authorization. Again, very specific conditions to use handheld green laser pointers for astronomy. It also deals with the possession of lasers. So this is our permission to be carrying lasers, because under Canadian law, technically, to carry a laser above 1 milliwatt, you need a permit. So this actually gives us a permit to carry a laser. That law falls under Health Canada laws. So this is where, again, it gets more and more complicated, because it's not just Transport Canada, but there are Health Canada laws that fall under this. So it also informs us of the 5 milliwatt maximum for power. So this is important. The user is responsible to make sure that their green laser is not above 5 milliwatts. So, because that's all we're allowed to carry. There are lasers you can buy off of Kijiji and places like that that will be above 5 milliwatts. So really you need to look at it and make sure it should have right on it. It'll have a little sticker, tells you how many milliwatts it is, as well as the class. The other thing that the permit gives us is provides links to the interactive map, and I'll look at that in a little bit. And it also details requirements for training. So what we're doing tonight meets the intent of the requirements for training in the permit, or sorry, the written authorization. You'll hear me use those specific terms because those are specific legal terms within Transport Canada's world. So written authorization and intent. Any questions? Okay. So we mentioned there that the one that's guiding us is the Canadian Aviation Regulation 601.20. It is enforceable regulation with fines and penalties, and they can be quite severe. So they could start at $5,000 and go up from there, depending on whether they charge you under that particular regulation or if they decide to do it under the Aeronautics Act. So they are enforceable. So if you break the rules, knowingly, willingly break the rules and don't use our permit correctly, you are personally liable. So that's not to scare you, it's just to let you know that there is teeth to this. So it also deals with the projection of any bright light in the airspace, as I mentioned, the air above us, and has a requirement to apply for a permit to project in airspace, which we've gone over and that we do have. So now the details, in order to use the RASC permit, the following must be complied with. So all these items must be used or dealt with. So the first thing we did is we determined that for this permit, or sorry, written authorization, the person to get authorization has to be an adult 18 years or older. It gets difficult in Canada. We picked 18 years because that was the one that was the most neutral, for lack of a better way to say it. They must be a RASC member in good standing for at least 2 years. And the reason we chose 2 years is we didn't want people joining the RASC just to get trained and use the permit and not have any idea if they were responsible people or anything like that. So that's the reason behind the 2 years in good standing. Okay, good standing by our bylaws means your membership fees are paid up. Okay, so that's how you determine if they're in good standing. Must have completed the Green Laser Pointer training course successfully in the past 3 years. So there's a 3-year life on this. So 3 years from now, Judy, everybody that's on this course would have to take the course again. Okay, so 3 years is, just so you know, in Transport Canada's world, 3 years is the traditional length of training. It's based on the old concept. If you train to 100%, in theory, you lose knowledge, 10% of your knowledge every year. So once you hit 70%, you're no longer viable as far as being in compliance. And we have to report any use of the written authorization to the RASC National Office. And this is partly to deal with Transport Canada puts resources towards completing the written authorization. So they need to know that it's worthwhile. So the centers will collect the data every time you use it, how many people, that information. Judy and I have been working with another fellow to try and get a simplified way of reporting it so it's collected. It's not quite ready yet, but we are working on it. But for in the interim, you would send it to the center council, and they would keep track of the information. And again, that once a year, we're supposed to, if transport asks for it, the RASC National is to provide that information. So again, it's just to show that it's worth everybody's time to go to the trouble of having these programs, which I believe it is. So we have the written authorization for the use of handheld green laser pointers outside of the 10-kilometer zone around certified airports. So the key word here is certified airports. The link, the other thing you're going to find, you're going to update this link on your slideshow, and it changes all the time. Transport Canada regularly changes everything in their website. It's a security thing they do. So I'm going to back out of this for a minute and show you what this looks like. Maybe. All right, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Oh, so the easiest way, just if you're taking notes, is you would just Google Transport Canada interactive map or just Transport Canada green lasers and click on the links, and eventually it'll take you to the interactive map. And all the interactive map means, I strongly suggest rather than scrolling, is you use the plus or minus bars over here. So if we zoom in, and I'm going to try and look in your area because I'm not, here we go. Let's see what happens. So these little dots, careful here. So everybody sees these dots. Those are certified airports. So within the red dot, you cannot use the permit. All right. Now that's not to say somebody couldn't have an event within the circle, but you would have to apply separately and get a special permit from Transport Canada, written authorization. You would do that with your local office there. So what it's meant to do is we'll just take it in a little further. So it's based on 10 kilometers. I'm just going to use the Dartmouth Halifax area. So if we go in a little bit more, So there's obviously 2 airports here, because there's 2 circles, so probably one over in Dartmouth and one in the Halifax area. I'm not exactly sure how I'm not all that familiar with the area. If you're outside these circles, you're okay. So for instance, this right here where Bedford is, I don't know where your sites are, but this would be safe area. You could be used a permit there. Wouldn't have any problem at all in any of these. It looks like it says Western Commons, this area here, all this area over here would be perfectly fine to use that. That does not mean there isn't airports there, but those airports are not certified airports. Okay? So certified airports are where there's usually regular aircraft coming in and out. Melody Hamilton, I see somebody out there having the question.
That's me, her husband, Bruce.
Okay, Bruce.
I got registered under Melody. What about military airports? We have a military airport.
Yes, but I think that's probably located within the circles that are here.
No, it's not. We live down the valley, down there.
Yeah, there's probably 2 military airports, one in Halifax. If you go down to the left of that screen, if you will, go down to the
military airports are normally certified as well.
yeah.
There's an airport in Greenwood.
Now go north. So
We're on the wrong shore here. Yeah.
yeah, the one down your way, Kingston way. There's Digby.
There's Digby. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
And interesting. That must
It's right in between Digby and Kentville.
Isn't that interesting? Dennis, there's a military base in Kingston, which is
In Greenwood, yeah, Kingston.
Greenwood, and it's not there.
And where would Greenwood be?
About halfway along that highway between those 2 red dots.
Between those 2 red dots.
Yeah, that's probably because they're outside of the Transport Canada's control. Okay. Mm-hmm. So again, if I was around that airport, if I was in the Greenwood area, Greenwood military base, I would do my best to stay outside a 10-kilometer area. Yeah. It's not controlled under this certificate, so by Transport Canada's rules, you're safe, but you do run the risk that inadvertently putting a laser onto an aircraft if your spotter is not really paying attention. So if you're outside the 10 kilometers, the reason the 10 kilometers is there is that with a 5 milliwatt laser, should you actually hit an airplane, you're not likely to cause any damage to the crew inside. They'll still get the splatter of the light. It's quite intense, but for causing eye damage, it's not likely to happen. Plus, usually the aircraft are high enough altitude that it'll be low intensity. Yeah. So that's what this is how we work. So if we stay outside of these, we're perfectly fine, perfectly safe. And for the most part, there's lots of, as you can see here, that you've got lots and lots of places you can still go. I mean, this is only a 10-kilometer circle, so you got to go 10 kilometers to get somewhere. I mean, usually you want to get 10 kilometers outside the city anyways to get a little darker sky sometimes. So does everybody understand how the interactive map works?
Mm-hmm. Oh, one other question. Can Max be my spotter?
Are they a member in good standing for 2 years?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to move back to the other one. All right.
Okay, Bruce, go back to the reactions and take your hand down, so to speak.
Sorry.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the interactive map, 10 kilometers. As we just went through all this. In part of your report, if you know where your GPS, it just makes it more accurate if you put a GPS, but at the very least, make sure you record the location of where you are. If it's your regular observing site for your center or something like that, just make sure you note it. That needs to be on the final report. It should also be when you notify your center that you're going to use the permit, you need to tell them where it is, because it gives them the opportunity to look to make sure you are outside those 10-kilometer interactive zones. Okay? The responsibility lies with the individual. but council does have the authority to say you can't use that tonight. So the authority, go ahead, Judy.
So then we should notify our center in advance of us going out
Yeah.
to use our GLPs?
Yeah, that's in here. There's a minimum time that we recommend.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, for a pop-up one,
Yeah.
what would you do then?
Well, again, each center can, it's flexible enough. Each center can be as loose. I hate to say that word that way, but so for instance, when we get to it, it's 8 hours is what we recommend, minimum 8 hours. Now, if the purpose of notifying the center is a couple reasons. One, by notifying the center executive, it becomes a center event, right? Because you can't use the RASC insurance unless it's a center event. So if your center is comfortable, as long as an email comes in and both people you got two trained people, one to be a spotter, one to be the user, they're outside the 10-kilometer zone, and you're okay with just an email, whether it's answer to that, that can be acceptable. That would be something you would build on and say, in our center, we allow that, okay, for pop-ups, all right? But again, we have to meet those kind of criteria so that should something happen, everything's in place, that you did it right. You had, like, it was a center event, you had the insurance in place, and so on and so forth, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So this is where I was just talking about. So the minimum, well, the centers can expand on this. We set it up at least 8 hours prior to an event, because usually somebody on the executive can respond and say, yeah, well, that's good. Or what we've done in our executive, as we said, if you don't answer, if you don't hear back from us, it's an approved event. Okay, so with the idea, because if you send all the information, maybe we just don't get to it, but at least it's recorded that you notified the center council, sorry. Okay. Email is great because again, you got proof of it, that it happened. And as long as in the email, you have the name of the person, the two people, those two people were trained and authorized, and the location was outside the 10 kilometers, and they should really be good to go, because it's their responsibility to make sure they have a copy of the written authorization, and a copy of the insurance, and a copy of their membership. Okay. Yeah. So the idea behind it, like I mentioned, in our center, if they don't hear back from us, it's approved. Again, your center will. I know, Judy, you started working on a draft policy there. What your center decides to do in that area, you can make it a little more flexible if you like. For us, the 8 hours has worked fine at this point, because usually what happens is somebody has a pop up, they're there by themselves, they don't have a second RASC trained spotter. So that's usually what, in our experience so far, that's what's happened. You know, so technically it's outreach, but it's not for using the GLP. It's not an approved RASC event, right? So, so again, we've already talked about this. You just need to inform the executive or your council who the GLP users are, spotters. And again, this just gives the executive the opportunity to confirm if they should choose to. And allows confirmation of the site that it's outside the 10 kilometers. Most of us, the other beauty of having somebody that's been there 2 years, you usually know those people, you know they're responsible, you know where they're going, so it makes it a little easier on the follow-up. You don't necessarily have to follow up every time, but if you've got somebody that you don't know, then you may want to follow up on it. Okay? It's not meant to be restrictive, it's meant to just tick all the boxes. So in order to use the permit, there's 3 things that need to be in place. A copy of your membership card, the written authorization, and insurance with them during the event. And I'll show you where to find those in just a moment, okay? So again, the membership card can be printed off from the members section of the RASC website. That's in the secure portion. And insurance copies can be requested from the same copy. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and move into the other one. Now, first, I'm going to bring up where you can find the on the RASC site where the permit is, or sorry, the written authorization, you log in, and then on the search, just put green laser. They used to have a bar up here. It's used to sit right there. It's gone now. So just search in the search, put green laser, and you'll find either it takes you there or you'll go to authorization. And there's a copy here written out, pasted. But this is the printable one. It's a PDF down here at the bottom. So you'd be able to print off the PDF. And again, it's good for 3 years. So until I think 2025. Yeah, 2025. That would be good. Print it off once, if you're one of your outreach people that do it regularly, and I would just keep it, build a little carry thing that I would take with me. So that's where to find that. Stop share.
So that's, oh, sorry. That's the authorization letter.
Yeah, and I'm going to take you now to, sorry, a lot of buttons. I got to go back and forth here. Here we go. Now for your card, you log into the secure site, okay? And then you go to your personal information. And at the bottom where you can edit your information is to print a temporary card. So I'll just click on that for a second so you can see what comes up. So it comes up, it gives the person's name, has the expiry date, so you know whether they're still a member in good standing. Keep in mind that the RASC has a policy of 2 months grace to pay you could be unpaid for 2 months and still be considered a member in good standing. Okay, so keep that in mind if you were to, quote, ask somebody to show you their card. But again, you can print your card off. It's good for until you go to renew it again. So you can see in this case, mine's good till 2024. So that's just that one. And again, that's in the secure site. In your personal information, you go to click on to edit it, and at the bottom is where you can print that. One more. So again, in the membership section, you can either search for public liability insurance, and then you go down to the bottom. And what you're looking for is you would click on the 20 for now, because it renews in June, I think it is, the general COI insurance. So I'll just click on that. And this is a confirmation of insurance. This policy does cover us for green laser pointer use with the written authorization. If you get an authorization within a 10-kilometer zone, you can't use this. Okay? All right, I'll explain why. Because now it's going to be considered a special event. So I'll go back. You would then apply online for event insurance for that one event. It takes about 20, if it's during a weekday, 24 to 48 hours usually to get it. If you're saying you're going to follow all the same rules as our written authorization, here's our letter from Transport Canada saying we can do it within that area. Maybe you're right on the edge or something like that, I'm not sure. For instance, Montreal Centre, not the RASC one, the Federation Quebec, FAQ, they have an area just off of the one airport that they do things, and they apply and get permits. They apply once a year, get a permit for multiple things. They just list the dates that they're doing it. So that if you had a site, that's what you would do. You'd have to apply for separate insurance. The broker has told us that they would give us, as long as we have the letter from Transport Canada, they should give you the insurance letter. certificate of insurance just like this, except it would be specific for that one event. Okay. Lots of paperwork. Any questions on that?
But basically, once you print those off once, you just put them in your kit and you're good to go.
You're good to go. Yeah, until they come and renew. So that's, you did, for instance, 1 second here. Just go back in here. So 31 May 2023, this would be good. And then the new one would be issued we would normally get, it usually takes a couple of days afterwards for it to be posted, but it's there. So, okay. Back. So I've shown you where to get the membership card, get your insurance, and the written authorization. Any questions on that? And again, once you do it once, I advise printing it off because you'll never remember how to get there again. All right, as I mentioned earlier, only a green laser pointer of 5 milliwatts or less can be used. That is a legal thing in Canada, and it's regulated by Health Canada. And anything larger is a public health hazard. So that's the ruling. I know people will argue, just a heads up, there'll be people saying, well, I can go and buy one off Amazon. Yes, you can. And it's very likely it will get through customs and show up on your doorstep. But it is actually illegal to be in possession of that laser without a permit from Health Canada for that laser. And they'll only issue it for scientific research or a laser show if you've got a license for those things. Class 3A or 3R are permitted. So again, this is a specific on the certification on the actual laser pointer. It will state it's 5 milliwatts, and it will state either a 3A or a 3R. It's a type of laser. So the big thing to understand is a laser of this size can cause disorientation to an aircraft crew, and if it's low enough, you can cause retina damage. What happens if you're not familiar? We did a little experiment in the hangar just to make a little video at work, just to show people. When it hits the windscreen, it scatters and lights up, just bathes the cockpit in a green light. And if they're dark adapted to their instruments, that becomes a pretty significant issue in the cockpit. So depending on a certain phase of flight, it can cause an accident, quite honestly. So that's why it's important that we do follow the rules and we share this information with people, because again, anybody can buy one nobody knows the rules that go with this. That it's actually, there are laws against possession of it. So our job is to try and share that information sometimes. So when you're actually using the permit, it's critical that the spotter is used at all times. So depending on where you are, most places one spotter is going to be plenty. Okay, so usually it's familiar areas, you know where your planes, if there are planes, because generally speaking, you will still have aircraft that will fly around you at height. So that you need to be aware of it and stop shining the laser in that direction until the aircraft travels through. So the GLP user is the one that needs to determine how many are required. However, as I said, minimum of one. Spotters got to be in a position to clearly observe where the GLP is being used and watch for aircraft that may fly into the area. So this is where it gets challenging, because we all like to see what they're pointing at. But the spotter has to look all around, because an aircraft could be coming from behind you. You know, and if you're looking at the show, you're not going to pick up that there's an airplane that just flies right into your laser. So the spotter's job is difficult. It actually is, because you're the one trying to look around and see everything. What will help the spotter is once people know what you're doing, they usually, even in a public crowd, they'll say, oh, there's an aircraft over there. And they'll help pick out where airplanes are. So you just move whatever you're doing for pointing out in the night sky, is just go to a different part of the sky for a few minutes, And then once the plane's gone, just move back over to the area that you were doing your presentation in. Usually the people that are really good at doing these presentations are so flexible, they know the sky so well, they just move back and forth. It just depends on how busy, where you are and things like that. How do we tell if it's an aircraft? I can't even remember what they call the new unidentified flying objects, but big thing that stands out, aircraft have position lights. They're green, red, and white, and usually a flashing light as well. So those are the things that give you away that it's actually an aircraft that's flying by. So if it's a flashing, pretty much guaranteed, you see a flashing light with them, or you see green and red, it's an aircraft, and usually a white. So the white light is usually at the tail of the aircraft. So that helps you as you get better at this, understanding the white will tell you what kind of where the tail is and gives you a bit of an idea of which direction they're going into. All right. Any questions on that? And it also gives you an idea. Satellites have a very different color and they tend to move a lot faster than an aircraft will. So satellites will be one color and they tend to move very. So when you're all done, as I mentioned, to the Executive or Council, National Office for Transport Canada. The condition of the written authorization is to provide that. And if you want to keep the authorization, report your events. Remember, the individual is responsible for compliance with the written authorization. If you do not follow it, you may void your insurance coverage if something were to happen. Now, I believe lots of people have, for many, many years, have used these safely. The permit is simply, or the written authorization simply reflects what the RASC has always done and promoted. So I don't think there's any time that we'll really ever have to worry about it unless somebody inadvertently was to wander or set up inside one of the 10-kilometer airport zones, okay? This is important. Transport Canada sees us as a positive influence and a partner to educate the public. So we recommend anytime you have a public event, take a moment and talk, whether you're going to do a night sky show or not with a green laser, talk to people about it and explain to them that there are rules that govern the use of it, and that really, if you're not a member of the RASC, as an example, you really can't take it outside and use it on your own. People may not like to hear that, they might argue with you, but that really is part of the education process. Maybe they will actually want to join the RSC to be able to use it. Most people want to follow the rules. So if they know about the rules, and the rules are easy to stay in compliance with, really. So that's what we try to do, is educate. Any questions?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So I have a hand flashlight that is capable of producing a narrow spot beam. Are there conditions at which that would be considered to be controlled in this manner?
So this is a good question. The first thing is that you wouldn't fall under the Health Canada rules because it's not a laser. Okay, just so on that side of things, so possession of it's not illegal. The question becomes, how far does it go? Okay, on the strictest interpretation of the rule, anytime you put a bright light, if it's a bright light in the sky, as 60120 says in the Canadian Aviation Regulations, the strictest interpretation of that rule, you may be in conflict with it. If the light, like most flashlights, bright light flashlights, the beam spreads out and it's not really going to disorient. And especially if you're outside the 10-kilometer airport zones, you're really not going to cause a problem. Okay, so then the practical portion of it comes into it, right? So my big advice is to try and figure out, if you're in a dark sky area and there's a barn somewhere nearby, point your light at it, see what it does. you know, so then you have it, then you know what your light does. You know what kind of hazard it could be. Maybe it's not a hazard at all. You know, for when you're close in, it looks really tiny and bright, but if it spreads out and scatters the light, then it becomes less of an issue. It's just it becomes a nuisance. It's not something that's going to disorient very likely in a cockpit. So does that help answer your question, Jerry?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Judy.
The information you mentioned, the information sent to the center. We'll have to identify who in our center will be receiving that. But the information you mentioned the GPS coordinates if we have it. So obviously the date, who's there, number of people in attendance. What types of other information would you want?
That's all you really need. They just want to know that it's used so many times a year, and in Canada, so many people were exposed, not exposed ideally, to the concept of using lasers safely.
Okay.
Dennis, are there any other groups authorized along these lines?
Yeah, there's been a few other centers, probably about 6 other centers that I've trained over the last year to be able to run the training in their own centers. So, yeah,
They would be outside RASC?
No, not outside RASC. This permit is strictly for members of the RASC.
Okay, thank you.
So in other words,
Member of the RASC.
Sorry.
Sorry.
To be even a spotter, you do have to be a member of the RASC to be a spotter.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, it's not meant to force people in the RASC, but the permit and the insurance is for RASC members only. So, and RASC events.
Dennis, did you explain what the insurance covers? I may have missed that.
It's just a general liability insurance. So that insurance is anytime there is a RASC approved event, meaning any center event is approved. So if you have a members observing night, the insurance covers you for general liability. So as long as there's no not abuse, that's not the right word, negligence. If there's no negligence, then the insurance will cover you. And it's meant to just provide general liability insurance for the whenever we have an event. If you have a public event, that's an approved RASC public event. When I say RASC, I mean really broad. That's usually at the local level, the centers. The insurance is in place automatically. So if you have an event, so for instance, what happens for us, we have our dark sky event out at Spruce Woods Provincial Park. The provincial park requires a separate insurance rider, not a rider, certificate of insurance for that event. So remember I showed you in that bar, you go and click on that bar and submit your event. We have to submit to the insurance, and then a couple of days later we get a letter saying that event at Spruce Woods is covered. And that they know what they do is they list the park as the being named in the insurance policy. So sometimes if you do an event, we'll do events out in front of for Astronomy Day in front of a bookstore usually. Sometimes some of them want that certificate insurance and some don't need a certificate insurance. The generic one is satisfactory for them. Go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, just as a matter of note, knowing that the chair of our Novi Star Party is here, we typically have requested that certificate for that particular event because it is held at a provincial park. I've been told we don't have to, but we have traditionally done it just to be on the safe side. That way it can be posted on site. So should there be any question, it's there.
Yep. In that same place I showed you where you could find the insurance, underneath the certificate of insurance, there is a bunch of questions and answers. About a year ago, National Council had a whole bunch of questions that was put in from the centers, and the insurance went and answered all of them. So if you had that may answer any other questions you might have about exactly what the insurance covers and doesn't cover. So if you have time to read it, it's quite extensive. It's actually very good and quite informative if you want to know exactly what it covers and things like that. So.
And just so members are aware, I believe that the FLQs regarding insurance are actually posted on our website as well for members. Under if you go look up policy documents, it's in there, I believe, on the Halifax Center site.
Any other questions?
Dennis probably means absolutely nothing, but on your map of the appropriate airport, the particular airports also had a number of triangles, and I'm just wondering what they might be.
In all likelihood, there are other airports, but they're not certified.
Okay, that's what I thought.
There's a
Thank you.
lot of little airports out there, dirt strips, things like that. They're recorded as airports, and but they're not a certified airport.
I think on that map, those might have been towers that have lights on them. So that issues, right?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Yeah. So, for instance, in Manitoba, I think we have 24 certified airports, but there's like 180 airports registered in the province, and that's everything from a dirt strip to somebody that may have a paved strip. But they're usually they're get technical. It means you can only fly in there during the daytime. Is usually the restriction. So if it's only allowed to be flown into in the daytime, then for those of us doing astronomy, it's not a conflict, right? So
yeah, that helps to the southwest of Halifax. It's just scrub bush, no roads, nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't define what those are on the map, so we'd have to try and find out where transport's pulling that from. So, any other questions?
Well, I'm curious as to what your aviation background is, Dennis.
Well, I'm a aircraft maintenance engineer, so I repair aircraft. My current role is I'm a aircraft maintenance manager, and so that's where I primarily work. But I've also been president of Manitoba Aviation Council. I've sat on the board, or not the board, the working groups for pilot flight and duty fatigue time. So I've got a mixed bag in there from different areas. And in the case of Manitoba Aviation Council, we dealt with all the airports as well. So I had to learn a lot of different things.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. So that's my background in very briefly in aviation. So been doing it since '79. So, any other questions? All right. So for those people that are worried, the exam's next. We're going to do it. It's done as a poll. So you answer the questions when we're going to. There's 20 questions. We're going to do the first 10. Or sorry, no, they're split up 3 or 4. June.
In 3 sections.
3 sections. So we're going to do one section. We'll correct them. Don't worry. It's not do or die. It's everybody will pass because we correct 100%. So once we'll do the poll. Once I see everybody's done the poll, then we're going to go through and review that section. And if everybody got everything right, then that's not a problem. We just move on to the next one, do the next poll until we're complete. So does everybody understand how that's going to work?
Yeah, Stephen Payne here. I had my hand raised a couple of times. So actually my question relates to just been asked. So I want to train a spotter.
Yep.
As a member of the RASC elsewhere in Canada, am I allowed to do that without oversight of the local centre? How do I go about that?
So this is where it gets complicated. So if you do it outside the center, you can't use that particular written authorization because it's to the RASC. If you had another RASC member with you, so one's the user and one's a spotter, I would just suggest that you let the center know that you're having an event, and just get it registered as an event, and then you fall under then you can use that written authorization, and you can use the permit, or sorry, the insurance as well. Does that answer your question, Steve? I'm sorry, for whatever reason, your hand, I didn't see it.
Okay, yes, you answered my question. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Whoops.
Stephen, this time I can see your hand, Steve.
Will these slides you presented be available to the centre?
Yes, I have them. Just ask for them and I will send them to you. And when you get the slides, I'll also send you the exam so that you can print it off hard copy or do as we did here in terms of conducting a poll. Depends on how you do your training.
Could we put the slide deck on our website?
I missed that, sorry.
Jerry asked if we could put the slide deck on our website. Is there any reason why we couldn't?
None whatsoever. No.
So the answer is yes.
There's nothing proprietary there.
It's not the exam.
No, yeah. And again, I see it as public outreach and education.
Yeah.
Really, educate more people. The more people we educate, the safer it'll be. So.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, folks. Well, that's all I have. Thanks for sharing your time with me tonight. I hope you found it, you learned a few things tonight and are able to share the sky with everybody and have a wonderful time.
Thanks so much for this, Dennis. It's really appreciated. Now it's just a matter of trying to figure out when we want to conduct our next sessions officially on behalf of the center, which does not preclude any of us here in the room, so to speak, from conducting their sessions in their own communities at any point in time. But again, you have to notify the center. We'll let you know as to who in the center to notify once the board is met later this month. So.
All right. Well, you guys have a great night, and I'm going to log off, and you guys take care.
Thanks
Thank you,
again,
Dennis.
Dennis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. Thanks
You're
very
most
much.
welcome. Good night.
Good night. And I'll stop recording.